If you want to understand how to get on Tony Soprano's good side, you first have to accept one uncomfortable truth about him. Tony is not a man who rewards goodness. He rewards usefulness, loyalty, and timing. He'll smile at you, slap your cheek, call you family, and treat you like you're protected, but the moment you stop being a net positive in his world, you start feeling that temperature drop. Tony's good side isn't a personality trait, it's a position. It's a spot you earn by fitting into the way he runs things, and more importantly, the way he needs things to feel while he's running them. Tony is a boss, but he's also a human being who lives in constant stress. He's managing money, egos, old grudges, threats from New York, and the sick reality that the people closest to him are often the ones most likely to disappoint him. That means good side isn't about being liked, it's about being safe. Safe to trust, safe to be around, safe to rely on when pressure hits. Tony keeps a small circle of men who make his life easier, not harder. And the second you start making his life harder, even if you think you have a good excuse, you're not just annoying him, you're disrespecting the entire structure he's fighting to keep upright. So if we're going to break this down the right way, you start with the obvious question. Who, in the crew, is considered to be on Tony's good side, and why? Then you look at the men who never really lived on that side. The ones Tony tolerated, distrusted, or kept at a distance, and why. And after that, when you finally see the pattern clearly, you can lay out the real code of behavior. The mindset you need, the decisions you need to avoid, the tone you need to have, and the kind of loyalty that actually counts in Tony's eyes. The men who are on Tony's good side are never the loudest guys in the room. They're not the most emotional, they're not the most needy, and they're not constantly asking for validation. They're the ones who understand that the boss is not your friend. They understand that you can be friendly, you can be close, you can laugh together, but the relationship is built on function and stability. The first and clearest example is Silvio Dante. Silvio is the definition of being on Tony's good side because Silvio understands the role. He doesn't fight Tony for attention, he doesn't challenge him just to prove he's tough. He doesn't create situations where Tony has to clean up a mess. Silvio is consistent, he's disciplined, he's predictable in the best way, and in Tony's life, predictability is gold. Silvio earns Tony's respect because he knows when to speak and when not to. He can disagree, but he doesn't do it like a rival, he does it like a counselor. He doesn't throw emotions into the air and demand Tony handle them. He watches the room, understands the mood, and helps keep things smooth. Tony's crew is full of men who act like children with guns, but Silvio feels like someone who could run a legitimate business without embarrassing himself. That matters because Tony is a man who wants to believe he's not just a thug. He wants to see himself as a leader, an executive, a guy with standards. Silvio makes that fantasy easier to maintain. He's a stabilizer. Every time Tony is forced to deal with chaos, he gets more paranoid and more exhausted. Silvio reduces chaos, even when he's standing next to it. Silvio is also loyal in the right way, not the desperate, clingy kind that screams, "Look how loyal I am." It's the quiet kind that shows up when it matters. Tony trusts him because Silvio's loyalty isn't performative. It's built into how he carries himself. He's not constantly proving himself, he's just there, doing the job. And Tony respects that because Tony himself wants to be respected without having to beg for it. Another guy who spends a lot of time on Tony's good side is Patsy. Patsy is a good example because his position is complicated. He has reasons to resent Tony, and Tony knows that. But Patsy chooses the life and chooses survival. More than that, he becomes useful and steady. Tony values men like Patsy because they understand the structure matters more than feelings. Tony lives in a world where feelings get you killed, or get you sloppy, or get you greedy. Patsy keeps it controlled. He's not out there acting like a superstar. He does what's needed. He's dependable. He doesn't create public drama. He's not constantly forcing Tony into emotional negotiations. Tony keeps certain men close because they don't bring him headaches. Patsy is not a headache. He's not a star. And Tony actually prefers that sometimes. Stars get egos. Egos get ideas. Ideas turn into problems. Patsy is the kind of guy who can hold a corner of the family down without demanding to be treated like a king. Tony likes that because Tony's biggest fear is being surrounded by men who all think they're him. Then you have Bobby Bacalieri. And Bobby is one of the most interesting cases because early on, he's not on Tony's good side in the way Silvio is. Early Bobby is treated like a soft guy, a caretaker, someone who exists more in Junior's orbit. But as time goes on, Bobby becomes exactly the kind of man Tony ends up valuing more than the loud tough guys. Bobby is steady. Bobby is loyal without being theatrical. Bobby doesn't play those heavy ego games all the time. And because of that, Bobby becomes someone Tony can actually rely on emotionally, even if Tony would never admit that in a clean sentence. Tony's good side is often reserved for men who don't trigger his insecurity. Bobby doesn't compete with him. Bobby isn't trying to outshine him. Bobby isn't constantly comparing himself to the boss. Bobby just wants to do his job and take care of his family. And ironically, that's what Tony wishes more people were like, even though Tony himself can't live that way. Bobby becomes important because Tony's world is full of betrayal and hidden motivations. And Bobby is one of the few guys who feels simple. Tony trusts Simple, because Simple is easier to control. You can even say that to get on Tony's good side long term, being less hungry can help you more than being ambitious. Tony is attracted to ambitious earners, but he's also terrified of them. He loves what they bring in, but he hates what they might become. Bobby never feels like a threat, which gives him a kind of safety that other guys don't have. Tony can talk to Bobby without feeling like Bobby is secretly building a case to replace him. Now look at Paulie Walnuts, because Paulie is weirdly both on Tony's good side and not on it. Paulie is one of those guys who benefits from history. He's an old school soldier. He's been around forever. He has a bond with Tony that goes back years. Tony enjoys Paulie's loyalty in theory and respects his past in the life. But Paulie also represents the type of guy Tony doesn't fully trust. Paulie is emotional, insecure, and needy. He wants attention. He wants to be reassured. He takes things personally. And he can't always handle being treated like just another piece on the board. So Paulie is on Tony's good side when he's behaving, when he's earning, when he's not causing friction, when he's not spiraling. But the moment Paulie becomes a problem, Tony's patience disappears because Paulie is too old to still be acting like that. Tony is more forgiving with younger guys because he can tell himself they'll learn. But with Paulie, Tony sees a grown man who still needs his ego burped like a baby. That wears him down. It doesn't mean Paulie is out. It means Paulie is always one mistake away from Tony feeling disgust instead of affection. And that's the real theme here. Tony's good side is not permanent. It's conditional. It's like credit. You build it up with consistency, you spend it when you make mistakes, and if you go negative, you don't get a polite warning, you get iced out. Sometimes literally. Furio Gunta, for as long as he's around, is another example of what Tony respects. Furio is efficient, he's direct, he's not running his mouth, he doesn't act like he needs a spotlight. Furio's good side status comes from the fact that he brings Tony something the Jersey guys don't always have, which is professional intimidation. Furio doesn't have the sloppy clown energy some of Tony's crew has. He has an aura of real seriousness, and Tony loves that because it strengthens Tony's power by association. When your enforcer looks like a disciplined machine, people assume the boss is even more dangerous. Furio makes Tony feel like a real boss, not just a local guy surrounded by idiots. But even Furio shows the real danger of Tony's world. Being on Tony's good side is great until you become a personal complication. Furio becomes emotionally entangled, and now he's not just an asset, he's a potential disaster. Tony's good side can turn instantly if he senses betrayal, disrespect, or humiliation. Now let's talk about the guys who are definitely on Tony's good side for shorter moments, usually because they understand how to operate. Guys like Hesh, for example, aren't soldiers. But Tony treats Hesh with a certain respect because Hesh is older, wise, and useful. Tony likes people who can give him perspective without challenging his authority. Hesh can say something real to Tony because he's outside the chain of command. Tony doesn't feel threatened the same way. That relationship shows something important. Tony doesn't just like loyalty. He likes loyalty that doesn't make him feel trapped. He wants advisors who support him without acting like they own a piece of him. Now you flip the lens and look at the men who are not on Tony's good side, or who live in a state of permanent probation. These are the guys Tony constantly tests, constantly doubts, constantly watches. Not because Tony is paranoid for no reason, but because these men repeatedly prove that when pressure hits, they don't choose the family, they choose themselves. Christopher Moltisanti is the biggest and most tragic example. Christopher is technically on Tony's good side at points, because Tony wants him to be. Tony invests in him. Tony treats him like family. Family, not just work family. Tony wants him to grow up, become strong, become reliable. But Christopher is one of those guys who can never stay stable. He's always swinging between love and resentment, ambition and insecurity, loyalty and self-pity. And that makes Tony's relationship with him exhausting. Christopher is not on Tony's good side long-term because he forces Tony into a role Tony hates, which is emotional caretaker. Tony wants soldiers. He wants earners. He wants men who keep their problems private. Christopher drags his inner life into the business. His addictions, his ego, his desire to be praised, his pain, his jealousy, his sensitivity. And Tony does not respect that. Tony understands pain, but he doesn't respect how Christopher handles it. Christopher also makes one mistake that always puts you in danger with Tony. He embarrasses him. Not necessarily in public every time, but in the way Christopher represents a bad investment. Tony sticks his neck out for him, and Christopher keeps proving that Tony might have been wrong. That's humiliating to Tony internally. A boss hates being wrong. A boss hates looking like he misjudged a man. Tony wants to see himself as an elite judge of character. Christopher threatens that self-image constantly. So even when Tony is warm to Christopher, there's always that cold undertone. Tony is waiting for the next disappointment. And once you become a man that Tony expects disappointment from, you're not on his good side anymore. You're on his checklist. Ralph Cifaretto is another classic case, but for different reasons. Ralph is a huge earner, and Tony respects money. Tony loves money. Money is the one thing that can buy you time and forgiveness in that world. But Ralph is not on Tony's good side because he represents chaos, disrespect, and a type of personality Tony hates dealing with. Ralph is the guy who always wants to be the smartest in the room. He's always pushing boundaries. He's always doing just a little too much. And Tony, even though he's violent and impulsive himself, wants to feel like there are rules. Tony needs the illusion of structure. Ralph tears that illusion apart because Ralph doesn't just break rules. He makes it obvious that rules are optional. Tony doesn't just hate Ralph because of personal reasons. He hates him because Ralph makes Tony look weak. When a captain acts out, other people watch the boss's response. If Tony can't control Ralph, then maybe Tony can't control anyone. So Tony's problem with Ralph is deeper than annoyance. It's an authority issue. It's about what kind of environment Tony allows to exist. Ralph brings in cash, but he also attracts heat, resentment, instability, and moral disgust. And Tony, for all his hypocrisy, still wants to believe he's not a complete monster. Ralph makes it harder for Tony to hold on to that self-image. Richie April is another guy who is never on Tony's good side, because Richie doesn't understand the era changed. Richie comes out of prison and acts like the past still rules the present. He's entitled, arrogant, and aggressive, and worst of all, he thinks challenging Tony is a good strategy. But challenging Tony is never about strength. It's about disrespect. Tony can tolerate disagreement. He cannot tolerate a guy trying to pressure him, corner him, or undermine him. Richie isn't just difficult. Richie is dangerous because he's political. He's trying to build support. He's trying to flex. He's acting like Tony's position is negotiable. That's the quickest way to end up permanently off Tony's good side, because it triggers Tony's deepest insecurity, which is the fear of being replaced. Feech La Mana is similar. Feech is old school and powerful, and those guys can be useful. But Feech also has that same disease Richie has, which is thinking he deserves to operate without checking in. Tony's system depends on control. It depends on everybody knowing who the center is. If you're out there doing your own thing, making moves, calling shots, and acting like your age gives you immunity, Tony will see you as a growing threat. Feech isn't just disrespectful, he's uncontrollable. And uncontrollable men are poison to Tony's reign. Then you have guys like Vito Spatafor. And Vito is a reminder that Tony's good side isn't purely about money or loyalty. It's also about the crew's culture and Tony's need to maintain order. Tony's relationship with Vito becomes complicated not because Tony personally wants to destroy him from the beginning, but because Tony knows the rules of his world. He knows what the crew expects. He knows what New York expects. He knows what the old school guys will never accept. Tony can be pragmatic, but he's still trapped inside the values and image of the organization. If keeping you around threatens the crew's unity, then you become a problem no matter how much you earned. Tony's good side is also affected by how much trouble your existence creates for him. You could be loyal, you could be useful, but if you force Tony into a corner where he has to choose between you and the stability of his entire environment, you're already losing. Tony hates being cornered. Cornering Tony is basically declaring war on your own safety. Even Artie Bucko, who isn't in the family, shows how Tony's good side operates. Tony likes Artie personally. He cares about him in a twisted way. But he also loses patience when Artie steps outside of his lane, acts impulsive, or starts reaching for gangster status. Tony respects people more when they accept their role. The moment someone starts pretending they're something they're not, Tony feels irritated because it reminds him of insecurity. Tony hates insecurity in other people because he can't handle it in himself. Now, there's another category of guys who aren't necessarily enemies, but they're not on Tony's good side either. These are the guys Tony keeps around because he has to, but he never really trusts them. Guys who are always a little too talkative, a little too greedy, a little too emotional. They may not be direct threats, but Tony never fully relaxes around them. And Tony's good side, the real good side, only shows itself when Tony can relax around you. That's the simplest litmus test. Can Tony relax around you? Not laugh. Tony can laugh around anyone. Relax means he doesn't feel like he has to watch you, manage you, or predict you. Relax means he doesn't feel like you're going to create a mess that he'll have to fix. Relax means he doesn't feel like you're secretly resenting him. Relax means your presence is a relief, not another job. That's why Silvio stays in the inner circle. That's why Bobby becomes closer later on. That's why guys like Patsy can survive and even thrive. Tony is drawn to stability because Tony's inner life is unstable. He's drawn to discipline because he lacks it. He's drawn to quiet competence because his world is full of loud incompetence. So now, once you've seen the pattern of who is on Tony's good side and who isn't, you can finally answer the real question. How should a member of the family behave and think if they want to stay on Tony's good side? First, you have to understand that Tony's respect is earned through outcomes, not intentions. In Tony's world, a good excuse is still a failure. You don't get points for trying, you get points for delivering. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. If you can't do it, you communicate early, with solutions. The worst thing you can do is surprise Tony with bad news. Tony hates surprises because surprises make him feel out of control. Control is his oxygen. Take that away, and he becomes dangerous. So rule 1 is simple. Do not create problems that Tony has to solve. If you create problems, solve them quietly before they reach his desk. Tony loves a guy who can handle business without dragging the boss into it. If something is truly above your pay grade, you bring it to him cleanly. No drama, no emotional speech, no panicking, just facts and options. Tony respects men who bring him solutions, not men who bring him stress. Second, always earn, but earn the right way. Tony wants money, but he wants money without heat. The guy who earns but attracts chaos is useful short-term and dangerous long-term. Tony might clap for you today and start questioning you tomorrow. The best earners in Tony's world are the ones who are consistent and invisible. They don't draw attention. They don't start wars over pennies. They don't get greedy and sloppy. They understand the balance between profit and stability. Tony's good side is built on the feeling that you are an asset, not a liability. Money is a big asset, but stability is an even bigger one. A guy who earns moderately but never causes trouble is often safer than a guy who earns huge but constantly ignites conflict. Third, show respect in the way Tony actually cares about, not in the way you want to perform it. Respect in Tony's world isn't just saying the right words. It's understanding boundaries. It's asking before you make moves that affect the family. It's not stepping on other people's toes without permission. It's not embarrassing the boss. It's not forcing Tony to discipline you in front of others. Tony hates being put in that position because it makes him look weak if he does nothing, and it makes him look unstable if he overreacts. Either way, you're making him perform leadership instead of simply being the leader. So if you want Tony's good side, you make his leadership easy. You do not test him. You do not challenge him publicly. You do not make jokes that cut too close. You do not use Tony's name loosely. You do not create situations where other guys can say, Tony lost control of his people. Fourth, understand Tony's biggest emotional trigger, which is betrayal and humiliation. Tony can forgive a mistake if it feels human. He can forgive bad luck if it doesn't feel like weakness. But betrayal and humiliation are different. They attack his ego and his safety at the same time. If Tony thinks you're talking to the wrong people, if he thinks you're disloyal, if he thinks you're building a base behind his back, you're done. It doesn't even matter if you can prove you didn't mean it. In Tony's world, trust is not something you debate, it's something you maintain. This is why the idea of being too friendly with outside power is dangerous. Tony doesn't want you cozy with New York unless it's controlled. He doesn't want you sharing information. He doesn't want you venting. He doesn't want you complaining to people who might use it. Even if you're not planning a betrayal, venting is the first crack. The moment you complain about Tony to the wrong person, you've shown you're capable of living in a version of the world where Tony is not the center. Tony cannot allow that. Fifth, handle your personal life like a grown man. Tony's crew is full of guys who let their personal issues bleed into business. Addiction, jealousy, relationship drama, ego wounds. Tony doesn't respect that because Tony sees it as weakness, and weakness attracts predators. He might understand it privately, but publicly he hates it. Tony wants you sharp. Tony wants you present. Tony wants you reliable. If you show signs that you're slipping, Tony starts thinking about risk. And once Tony thinks you're a risk, he starts emotionally distancing himself. This is a cold reality, but it's true. Tony is not a therapist to his guys. He has his own therapist because he can't handle his own mind, but he does not want to carry yours too. The moment your personal life becomes Tony's problem, you're draining him. Draining Tony is one of the fastest ways to leave his good side. Sixth, never be too hungry. This is the one that confuses people, because ambition is supposed to be respected in this world. But Tony's world punishes ambition when it starts to smell like entitlement. If you're constantly asking for more, constantly comparing, constantly counting what other guys have, Tony starts seeing you as a future headache. He wants men who are satisfied enough to be stable. The guys who last are the ones who understand patience. They earn, they keep their mouth shut, they build quietly. They don't demand Tony validate them every week. They don't complain that they deserve more respect. They don't act like they're on the edge of snapping because their ego needs more oxygen. Tony respects men who can control their appetite, because Tony knows appetite is what kills people in this life. Seventh, be loyal in a way that doesn't trap Tony. This sounds strange, but it matters. Tony hates loyalty that comes with emotional chains. The kind of loyalty that says, I did this for you, so now you owe me forever. Tony hates feeling indebted because indebtedness makes him feel weak. He wants loyalty that's clean, loyalty that feels natural, loyalty that comes from understanding the life, not from demanding personal credit. This is why Silvio is so valuable. Silvio doesn't make Tony feel emotionally cornered. Silvio doesn't guilt him. Silvio doesn't whine. Silvio just operates. That kind of loyalty is comfortable for Tony. It feels like order. Eighth, understand Tony's psychology. Tony is a man who wants respect, but also wants affection. He wants to be feared, but he also wants to be loved. He wants to be seen as a tough boss, but also as a good guy underneath it all. If you know how to feed the right part of him at the right time, you can stay on his good side for a long time. That means knowing when to be tough and when to be humble. Knowing when to talk and when to listen. Knowing when to flatter him lightly without sounding fake. Knowing when to back off and let him cool down. Tony is emotional and impulsive, and if you don't understand that, you'll keep walking into his storms. You don't get on Tony's good side by being perfect. You get there by being smart about his moods. Tony can love you one day and hate you the next, and the men who survive are the men who don't panic when the temperature changes. They stay steady. They don't take it personally. They don't start acting desperate. They wait it out, keep earning, keep behaving, and eventually Tony's mood shifts again. Because that's another truth about Tony. His good side is often just his mood. And his mood is affected by stress, by food, by family issues, by New York pressure, by his own guilt, by his own shame, by the fact that he can't control his own mind. If you treat Tony like a machine, you'll misread him. He is not a machine. He is a man constantly trying to hold on to his identity while everything around him decays. So the best way to stay on Tony's good side is to become one of the few things in his life that doesn't decay. Be consistent, be useful, be respectful, be quiet, be reliable, earn without chaos, solve problems before they reach him, never embarrass him, never corner him, never force him to choose between his pride and your survival. And most importantly, never forget that Tony's good side is not about friendship. It's about whether your existence makes his life easier. In Tony's world, that is love. Not the warm kind, not the clean kind, the brutal kind. The kind where being valued is the same thing as being safe, and being safe is the closest thing any of these men ever get to peace.